Hi. So it looks like we've still got some people coming through the waiting room, but given that there are a couple of minutes past now, we'll get things started. And yeah, as people come in, they can join for the introduction. So yeah, I'll start by saying thanks for everyone joining us today, for taking some time out of your day. Before we get started, I've just got a few quick things to run through in terms of housekeeping for how we'll run things. I'm shortly going to hand over to our panel chair today, who is Patrick, one of Impart's co-founders and co-CEOs. Patrick's going to welcome each of our panelists on today, who will provide a quick introduction to themselves, their company, and their general approach to working with universities. And then we'll start with a Q&A with a few questions that we've prepared, moving on to some of the questions we've received in advance of the webinar, and then we'll open up to a live discussion with the panelists. So yeah, if you have any questions at any point for specific panelists or for all our panelists today, you can use the Q&A button below, and Patrick will pick those up and put those to our panel. If you have any technical issues, you can use the chat feature to send us a message directly, and I'll pick those up through the webinar. We've started recording, and we'll be sending this around early next week. So yeah, feel free to share this around with your colleagues, anyone who can't make it today. And yeah, that's everything from me. So Pat, would you like to bring your audio and video in and take things away?
Brilliant. Yeah, and thanks, Alex, for all the organisation elements of putting this webinar together. And thanks everyone who's joining us from around the world today. We have over 400 registered attendees for the webinar today, which is pretty amazing, and I think a really great endorsement to the quality of the panelists that we've got joining us on the webinar today. A couple of quick things. Quick thanks to PraxisAuril for helping us promote the webinar. If you're not familiar with them, they're the UK's professional association for knowledge exchange practitioners, and thoroughly good people beside. The panel was originally intended to be this webinar. The panel was originally intended to be at their UK Tech Transfer Conference. Sadly, not able to go ahead, but pleased we could put it together virtually and showcase some hopefully an interesting discussion today. Obviously, it would be nice to see everyone's faces rather than looking at myself in the video. Quick introduction to me. So my name is Patrick Speedy. I'm one of the co-founders, co-CEO of Impart. Impart's a digital platform that connects universities and companies to facilitate collaboration, commercialization. We've been doing that since 2014, and our network is now over 1,400 universities, with a company network of about 6,500 of the world's most innovative companies. There's a few people joining us probably from different perspectives from our platform. So the first side of our platform is a technology push model where universities can post their technologies and they get matched via a matching algorithm to companies with mutual interests to connect with them, gather feedback. The second is one called Impart Discover, where companies put out their calls and requirements to universities, driven much more from a company perspective. And it may be that people have engaged with one or the other one of those products who are joining the webinar today. The webinar itself is entitled, What Do R&D Teams Want from Universities? So the idea is to bring together a panel of thought leaders from industry to share their outlook on how they collaborate with universities and research institutes. We're going to try and establish what R&D teams look for in potential new academic partners, how they evaluate new opportunities to collaborate, and what some of their current priorities might be, and how they commercialize academic research in general. So hopefully from today, we'll be able to gain some useful insights into defining requirements from companies, how they go about doing that, how they define their requirements for universities, their outlook on collaboration, commercialization with universities, a bit on what their current priorities might be at the moment, and assessing the motivation to work with universities from a company perspective. As mentioned, we have a very much an expert panel today, different sectors and a mix of approaches to how they collaborate with different types of opportunities and different universities. We have Barclay Satterfield, External Innovation Technology Manager from Eastman Chemical Company, Matthias Haas, Associate Director, Immunology Partnering at UCB Pharma, Elisa Band, Senior Investment Manager at Henkel Tech Ventures, Chemicals and Materials. Just to reiterate what Alex has mentioned in terms of how the webinar is going to run, it's a panel forum. So following my introduction, I'm going to invite each panelist to come and give a quick introduction to themselves and their companies and their roles, ideally keeping that to around 5 minutes per panelist. After that, as Alex mentioned, we've got a few questions that we prepared, and we also put out a call for questions in advance of the webinar. So thank you for everyone who's submitted their questions already. We have those in the list and we'll try and get through all of those. Over and above that, as Alex mentioned, there's a little Q&A button at the bottom. If anyone wants to hit that and ask a question to the panel at any time, you can do that. And what I'll try and do is try and tease out some of those questions. And depending on how we're doing for time, hopefully we'll get through the vast majority of those. Great. So with that, what I'll do is I'll duck out and invite Barclay just to come and give your introduction first, if that's okay.
Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon, everyone. As Patrick mentioned, my name is Barclay Satterfield. I work for Eastman. I'm a PhD chemical engineer by training, and I've been with Eastman for about 7 years, mostly in our external innovation division. So Eastman, for those of you that don't know, is a Fortune 500 company. We are headquartered in Northeast Tennessee, but we're a global company. So we have research on 3 continents, manufacturing on 4 continents, and customers in over 100 countries. We're an advanced materials and specialty additives company. And so what that means is, so we're business to business, meaning that you've probably never purchased an Eastman branded thing off the shelf as a consumer, but we are in a lot of things. So building and construction and transportation are our top 2 markets. In transportation, we are in tire additives. Our products go into windshields and car paint, and even aviation turbine oil. In building and construction, our products are used in house paint additives, in carpet backing, in the adhesive that keeps roof shingles attached, and in window films for both energy efficiency and aesthetic purposes. We also sell a lot of products into consumer products. So a lot of fabrics or textiles. Our products go into flat screen televisions, designer eyeglasses, and then more kind of everyday things like food packaging, diapers, tape, etc. So that laundry list is to kind of illustrate that we have a lot of different products, a lot of different chemistries, a lot of different applications, and thus a lot of different research needs. So as you might imagine, we have a lot of research going on internally, but we also look to external partners to assist us. And that's consultants, that's contract research organizations. But my area specifically is our academic partners and our focus there. Eastman's engagement with our academic partners is strategic. We have 3 long-term research engagements where we have chosen 3 schools to partner with and entered into master research agreements there. So we have our NDAs, we have IP figured out, etc. In addition to those 3 long-term partnerships, we do look for single project opportunities where a faculty member really anywhere has the expertise that we need and enter into agreements with their school for that project. We're also, as it makes sense, members of consortia, and we recruit broadly across many campuses for talent. So that's a little bit about where we're working. How we see our academic engagements is as a really crucial part of our innovation strategy. So the questions that we bring to our academic partners are helping to inform and accelerate the work that we're doing internally. And what we get from working with them is access to capabilities that we don't have, but also a diverse set of problem-solving skills and a diverse set of backgrounds and expertise to really bring to bear on our problems. From our perspective, we feel like our academic partners get the chance to work on some real-world problems, and we've also seen that their students really benefit from the development opportunity and the engagement with professionals working in industry in their field. So with that, I will close and hand it back to the next person.
Fantastic. Thanks, Barclay. That's really interesting and a great introduction. Mateus, I'll ask you to come and do your introduction now, if that's okay.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone, or good morning, depending on where in the world you are. First of all, thank you to Impart for having me on this panel. It's always fun to reach an audience in a different way and also do something different to your normal day job. So I'm gonna also spend a bit of time talking about myself, my company, and my role, and it will probably, apart from that, it's just information, will also help to explain the answers that I will give later to your questions, just because I have very specific way of looking at things. So quick background, as all of you will have guessed now by my name and my accent, I'm originally German. I did leave Germany after finishing my PhD at University of Munich. Did 2 postdocs after that, so I was a proper scientist at one point. One was in London at the ICRF, which is now called Cancer Research UK, on DNA repair, and then a second one in Switzerland at again cancer research, working on telomere biology. That was the ending of my illustrious academic career, and I joined a small biotech in London again called Informatica. That was a sort of UCL spin out around computational structure biology. And after that, ended up in UCB, where I'm also now since about 13 years. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more of my role there, but first let me spend a bit of time on UCB, because it's probably not that well known to many people. So UCB is a mid-sized Belgian biopharma, headquartered in Brussels, with about 7,500 employees globally. We are actually in many places in the world, so operations in over 40 countries. And our main focus is around neuroscience and immunology. Neuroscience, a particular focus on epilepsy. So this is where a lot of people know us from. So we have many products in the market on which are sort of anti-epileptics. And in immunology, it's around sort of rheumatology mainly. We have an anti-TNF antibody in the market there, and have further programs behind there. Recently, we expanded a bit out of these sort of like main areas into musculoskeletal and also into dermatology, and have a couple of exciting products there, either in market or in the pipeline. We're very R&D heavy, so we spend about 1/4 of our revenue on our own research, and we spend the money so in 2 sites, which is in outside Brussels in a place called Braine-l'Alleud, which is for neuroscience, and in Slough, so a bit outside London in the UK, on immunology, and that's where I'm based. In addition to our sort of like in-house research, we have an active partnering model. We of course realize we have a limited size, so we cannot discover everything new ourselves. So we are very happy and very actively looking for the best partners throughout the academic world and also biotech, and who along the whole value chain basically. So this is early research targets until formulation, marketing, and so on. So we're always very happy to talk to new people, very happy to explore partnering options, because we think it makes us stronger. Now a couple of words on my own personal role there. So I'm part of the immunology partnering team. So we are a BD / partnering function that's embedded in the research organization. There's also one on the neuroscience side. We are a team who is sort of science-based, so we understand science, we speak science, hence the being embedded with the research organization. And we mainly do scouting and evaluation for anything early discovery up to about phase 2 ready. And in addition to our own sort of scouting, active scouting, we're basically a point of contact internally for anything that comes into the company which falls into that space of discovery to early phase 2. And we also have a global BD, a proper BD function, who are more responsible for M&As and out-licensing and so on. But we collaborate with them when we get towards the transactional stage. I leave it as that. Looking forward to your questions, and yeah, speak to you a bit later.
Brilliant, thanks, Matthias. No, really interesting as well. Great, and then yeah, I won't chat anymore. I'll just invite Elisa to come and do your introduction as well, if that's okay.
Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Elisa Band. I am a senior investment manager with Henkel Tech Ventures, the venture arm of Henkel Adhesives. A little bit about Henkel. Henkel is a German, originally a German-based company. Started out in a laundry detergent about 150 years ago. Now, Henkel is a global company. Here in the US, we have about 70 locations. The business is divided into 2 or 3. There is still the laundry and home care strategic business unit. There is also the beauty strategic strategic business unit, and I am part of the adhesives business unit. So a lot of brand names are part of Henkel. You might know us as Persil, all in the laundry, in the beauty, we do hair colors, Schwarzkopf, and a bunch of other brand names. Dial, the soap, is ours. The brand names vary depending on the location. And like I said, I'm on the adhesive side. So Henkel got into adhesives by looking for glue to close up boxes for laundry detergent. And many years later, basically we're now the adhesive side of the business is about half of the business. So Henkel is in adhesives and coatings, functional coatings, in a very wide variety of industries, anything from mobile to cars to sports, sneakers, diapers, anything that needs to be glued together, but also a lot of functional coatings. So many different industries, so many different materials, so many different technologies, but anything really to do with, on my side of the business, anything to do with adhesives, coatings, manufacturing, because we're in a lot of manufacturing products, systems, dispensing of our materials and manufacturing and things like that. That's Henkel Adhesives. I am part of the corporate venture capital team, which is based in Germany, but I myself am based here in the US in Connecticut. One of our facilities is the Rocky Hill offices, which is about 20 minutes from where I am at the moment. And the corporate venture capital team invests for minority stakes of up to 20% in startups. Our interest really in engaging with universities is really to gain access to the pool of spin-offs from the universities. Those spin-offs still might be a little bit too early for us to invest, but they have a very large, they have a potential for entering our collaboration pipeline. And you'll see that every CVC is different. At Henkel, a large part of our activity is investing in engaging with startups for collaboration opportunities. And then once we see that the collaboration is a good collaboration, that it has various touch points within the corporation, we start to look at the spin-off from an investment perspective. It might be an M&A target as well, but at the CVC, our viewpoint is really for the investment side. So I've been with Henkel only for about four months, almost 4 months. Before joining Henkel, I headed the technology scouting for ICL Group for 6 years, and before that I was a business development manager at Tel Aviv University. So I really have that perspective of the whole spectrum of technology transfer and the innovation ecosystem surrounding university inventions. I have 2 chemistry degrees and an MBA, all from universities in Israel. And I am also chair of Autumn's Industry Advisory Committee. That's a group that we formed about 3 years ago, a group of representatives from various industries. And I just want to mention that to go more into details of what Henkel is looking for and what colleagues of mine within Autumn representation, there is going to be a separate webinar on that on, I think, October 16th and November 6th, but that needs to be checked. And that's where I will go into a little bit more details of what we're looking for and how to get in contact with me and so on, just to give that insight. So happy to be here. Thank you for InPart for organizing this. I've used InPart, I think, for the past 2-3 years, and definitely they're great at helping us industry pinpoint university technologies that have a potential for collaborating with industry. So thank you.
Perfect. No, thank you, Elisa, for the plug there, and sending all my very best to all of your AUTM colleagues, counterparts, and people there. Very disappointed we couldn't get to see a lot of people that we know and everything else in February. So yeah, great. I'll invite Matthias and Barclay just to come and join us then. If you can turn your microphones on and your videos on. Really great introductions from everybody. Really diverse range of companies, sectors, experiences, etc., etc. So that's really interesting, and thanks for the introduction. Thanks for keeping roughly to time as well, which is great. So yeah, the first few questions we'll just jump straight into them then. So I'm gonna pose these to each of you kind of individually, and I know, Elisa, your perspective might be slightly different, where focused on startups and spin outs. But the first question is, what's your starting point for in your search for a solution from academia? So when you start to, you sit internally in your company and you're starting to look, okay, well, we may have a requirement in this research area, or it may be that you don't know where to start. We definitely hear that from some companies. They don't know what they want until they actually see it. And I guess just adding to that, how do you find your requirements and your interest, and what approaches do you take to find the right potential partners that could fulfill your needs? I'll come to you, Barclay, just because you've had the longest break from the beginning.
Okay, so most of our engagements are driven by internal needs rather than external folks approaching us with ideas. And in that case, we do already have a pretty strong sense of what our question is and what success looks like. What we try not to do as we're approaching academic partners is assume what the solution or the path to success would be, right? Because that's where the academic creativity comes. I mentioned that we have 3 long-term relationships. That's with NC State, UNC, Chapel Hill, and University of Tennessee. Because of those relationships, we tend to try to go there first in terms of do they have the expertise and the ability to address whatever need we've identified. But we also look across the globe in terms of faculty experience and knowledge. And the way we identify those is often through who is published in that area, presentations at conferences, things like that.
And if I'm in this audience now, I might be thinking, like, how do I become the next NC State? Or, how do I be the next UNC Chapel Hill? Are those relationships built over an extended, do they start with small projects, people can get the foot in the door and then it leads to something else? Or do you define a requirement that you need another big long-term partnership for your company?
Right. So I'll actually refer the audience to UIDP, which is an organization out of the United States that does kind of specialize in supporting university industry partnerships. And in particular, they've published a partnership continuum that kind of talks about the movement from one-off relationships around recruiting or senior design projects or things like that, all the way to a long-term major research agreement. When we particularly identified the three that we're working with, it was a desire to move from many small relationships to a small number of large relationships in which faculty would get to know us well, and we could start projects quickly because all the legal stuff like non-disclosure and IP terms had already been agreed to. So we identified those schools through understanding of their expertise and the overlap between so I mentioned we're materials and chemistry company. So the chemical engineering and chemistry departments, material science departments. I also mentioned we're in textiles. So NC State has a really strong college of textiles. So that overlap in expertise and strong, deep bench overlap. I think one of I'm tipping your hand to a future question, which is institution size, but knowing that there's not just a single faculty member, right? Because people do move. Those kinds of things really attracted us to these schools, and then each school's willingness to work with us and their interest in actually having an academic partner, excuse me, an industry partner, and willingness to just negotiate with us on what the terms of each of those agreements looks like. So
that's really interesting, and definite shout out to UIDP. It's called University Industry Development Partnerships, and
yes.
Tony and the team over there doing some really great stuff. So I encourage everyone to go and have a look at their website if you haven't already. So yeah, just moving on. Matthias, do you have any thoughts on the first question about the starting point for your your search or identifying solutions with academia?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned before that we have sort of the opportunistic side and the strategic side, and the opportunistic side of course doesn't fit so much into that, because that you just react to what you see and you see how it fits in and whether you can build something out of this. So for the strategic side, it starts with basically what the R&D organization has as a one or multi-year strategy, right? So for example, if they want to be in rheumatoid arthritis or in any other area, and we then from the scouting side determine which of those we think we can be most productive in helping with. I mean, not everything that that the researchers want to work on is scoutable, right? So some things are so badly defined that you can't go out and ask for things because you can't even assess what that means. So we basically determine our sort of scouting objectives from that research strategy, and that's basically a sub list of that. So once we've got that, so we know what we're looking for, and we have the features, the parameters that we are looking for, we probably have sort of three main ways of how we engage with the outside world, including academia. And that's basically our in-house network. I mentioned we have a quite strong research organization, so about sort of maybe 300 to 400 researchers. They all come from academia at some point, so they all know people and people know people. So I think the first one is basically in many cases we already know someone who works on something. That will be probably our first starting point. The second one is partnering meetings. So this is where we meet probably most of the folks that are on the line right now. So where we go to TTOs and say, we're looking for this, have you got any of those? And the last one is services like, for example, the InPart Discover. And there are others where you basically ask someone external to basically map the world for you in a certain aspect. And which one we do first or predominantly depends on how well we understand the area that we're scouting for. So if we know it really well, we're probably staying very close to our in-house network, because then we know already the experts, most of them. If it's something where we say that's a new area we want to go into, we probably would go with something like InPart Discover. show us the landscape, show us the outside world, so bits of more horizon scanning. And the partnering meetings are sort of like fall in between. I mean, they're scheduled anyway, so they're always a good way to meet people and also have a certain sort of serendipity element in there as well, because as we know, success can often not be planned, but you also have to basically be open to get in something from the side.
And just on the conferences point there, Matthias, obviously there's, I know some, particularly the bio conferences, are still going ahead virtually, and if people in the audience are sat here with something, haven't glanced at your website and thought, I have got the thing for Matthias and the team at UCB Farm, your team still attending the virtual conferences that are being hosted and that sort of thing, the virtual partnering conferences, still active in those sort of areas if people wanted to go and find you at those events?
Yes, so we have at least always one member of our team as also those conferences. So just again to be there and be able to find people, it has definitely sort of it's not neither as nice nor as effective as it was before in terms of also the people you can meet, but it's still a useful place to make connections.
Yeah, definitely. And just for any people in the audience that may aren't looking at them in the past, have found them overtly expensive, some of these particularly in the bio sector, they have certainly lowered their prices quite significantly for the virtual conferences.
Oh, so yes.
You can actually go and attend, I think, 2 or 3 of the most recent bio conferences for a very reasonable, significantly discounted, 80% or so from what the original charges, and obviously not have the travel costs to go along with it. We've personally found them, the engagement's been slightly lower than obviously you get on a person-to-person conference, but still for the investment in time and money, it seems to stack up okay. Yeah, and then Elisa, so just pointing that question towards you. Sure. As well, to sort of your starting point.
Right. So like everyone else, there are different ways that opportunities or deals come our way. Some from the operating business, some from conferences, some from dedicated scouting searches that we do, the whole spectrum really. Some passive, that the startups approach us or the universities approach us, and there is some more active searches. So I just want to say what we use when we do have those active searches. Unlike my previous position, the numbers are just much lower, right, with startups compared to earlier stage technologies. But even so, I mean, we don't really go into university websites or the accelerator websites and go through the portfolios. What we use are more comprehensive databases. So just kind of like as a tip, for those that are responsible for accelerators or that are more even sometimes incubators, whoever's on the line, I would just kind of make sure that those startups are on those more general databases. If it's Crunchbase, PitchBook, Lux, those are some of the ones that kind of come to mind. We do get letters from different organizations, and so if the startups have an active PR effort, then those would pop up on those as well, and then we kind of pick it up. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily rely on just posting the spin-offs to the portfolios of the accelerators or the incubators or success stories of the universities. I would really do a little bit more marketing there, and with the profile of the startup and some basic financial information and so on these more general databases. You had mentioned conferences, so I definitely can add to the list that we're very active in Tech Connect. There aren't a lot of non-bio, non-life science conferences, I guess, that do have that kind of interaction with startups or innovators or technology managers, but definitely Tech Connect. I was there last year and we were participating virtually. I was there last year with my previous position, and we're participating, I think we're one of the sponsors even the Tech Connect. They have different channels or different kind of general topics, and they seem to be doing a good job of pushing out those calls and so on. So it's not something that I would neglect. Yeah, and obviously a lot of the opportunities do just come by cold calls or cold emails asking us, could this be relevant, and so on. And that is something that we do encourage. You know, don't worry about spamming us or anything like that. We do appreciate those questions early on, even in the technology, even before forming those startups. We'd love to give our input and even kind of focus maybe the development in some way, and that way make it more attractive for us at a later stage. So if you have, you know, universities or accelerators, whoever, if they have those questions when they're trying to decide if to form a startup, if to look for entrepreneurs or whatever, really don't hesitate to reach out to me or to one of my colleagues at the CVC. Again, I'll mention it, every CVC is different. So at Henkel, that is our kind of approach to it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as a digital platform, the thought of cold calling makes me want to, like, you know, shout and put my hands over my ears. But, you know, obviously it's still a thing that people definitely do. Can I just ask?
Yeah.
Can I just ask, Lisa, just in terms of, because a lot of the questions we get from universities are about, you know, that they aren't sure whether to spin something out or not. You know, there is a question mark within the university where they feel there's some commercial application to a technology. They're considering their options, what they might do. So I call these kind of like pre-spin out opportunities, and often when we see them come into our platform, they're tagged as, you know, open for spinning out an investment, but there isn't actually a company formed around it. Is there a stage at which you start to consider engage? You know, is there a stage they have to have a registered company, they have to have a CEO, or I'm sure there's a stage at which before you'll engage or not?
So again, every CVC is different. At Henkel, we typically don't do seed investments, but a newly formed startup or a group of entrepreneurs can definitely collaborate with our business units. And then whenever it's ready, whenever it is more at that later stage, obviously the valuation will be different and so on, but that's when it kind of starts to become more interesting from the CVC's perspective. We definitely promote and engage in earlier stages, but it's more for the collaboration and not necessarily for the investment part. But, you know, I mean, I've been there, right? It's definitely a hard decision point of what route for commercialization you're going to take for technology. And there's so many different considerations that go into that. It has to do with the inventors. It has to do with the local funds that are available, you know, state funds, university funds that are available in order to promote that. There's so many different considerations. From what I've seen, some universities take a more flexible route, and they kind of look at the different options in parallel or in whatever way. Some universities prefer licensing out. It's obviously less of a risk. But for some technologies, it's just not going to work. It's going to be too early for our type of company. Other corporations might have different outlooks, but
no, that's great.
I would just say don't waste too much time on thinking, just do, right? And if it doesn't work out, then you have the time to kind of shift and go towards the spin out route.
Sure. Okay, no, that's interesting. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we've got about 5 or 6 that have been sent in advance, and I can see a few more coming through on the Q&A. So I'll ask you to try and keep the answers to this one probably as brief as possible. But the next question was really about the good and the bad, I suppose, that I wanted to ask, and to be as honest as possible. So, like, you know, when you see an opportunity, however that might, you know, manifest itself, that might be a real person in front of you at a conference, it might be something that comes across your desk, it might be something you hear about from a colleague. What is it that, you know, really gets your ears to, you know, to twig up? And then what is it that really can be the put off? And it might be something like, you know, lack of responsiveness. It might, I don't know, it might just be purely based on the research that gets you going. that's really interesting. But it's kind of the good and the bad I wanted to see, you know, the do's and don'ts, I suppose, that you might see from an initial interaction with a piece of research or a person in the university. I'll go to Matthias for that one first, if that's okay.
to be the bad guy first. And nobody will ever meet with me again. The good and the bad. So I mean, it depends, as I said before. So in terms of what actually goes into deciding whether an opportunity is good or bad, it depends on your shopping needs, basically. What is it you're looking for? How easily can it be measured? And does the opportunity that's presented, does it fit your bill? Or can it be developed so maybe it'll fit your bill later? So that's basically more the factual side. On the more behavior, and of course also, which is important, can it be owned, right? Is there some IP, is there some know-how, something where it would make sense for a commercial company like us, basically, to invest in, because they can get ownership of that, or collaboration ownership of that. So those things are part. If we talk more of the behavioral side, so I mean, what always excites me, I think, is really interesting science, right? If something is groundbreaking, really exciting, and you can tell it's somehow fun. And I think from the TTO representation, I always like people who know what they're talking about, and not talking about sort of in-depth science, because they usually have a quite varied portfolio, but you know, they know what they've got, they know what it's worth, and they know, so basically, the strength and the weakness of that, because everything that maybe we may turn down, somebody else is exactly right? So it's the not selling you something, but saying, this is what it is, we think it's good at this, it's bad at that, and you can say, yeah, okay, I'm going for that. So the directness and the straight upness is something that I always appreciate, because it saves everybody's time. Yeah. And the rest is, yeah, I don't know. I think a certain level of engagement is good. I know that's difficult because everybody has sort of like a huge portfolio, but it is quite nice that if after, for example, meeting somewhere at a conference, they do stay in touch and do think of you if there's something coming up on their side. But yeah, I think the honesty about what they've got, and the overview, and the knowing what you have in your portfolio, I think is something I always appreciate.
No, that's great. And Barclay, any thoughts from yourself?
So I know you want to get through this quickly, so I'll just echo something that Matthias said. We're really looking at whether the technology fits with our innovation strategy and what we're trying to do internally. If you get told no by us, it's not because the research is bad. It's often because it's excellent, but it doesn't fit with what we're trying to do right now. And I think that's probably the case for a lot of industry interactions. As far as behavior, I think, you know, everyone is, I've not had like an unprofessional interaction really that I can say, oh, that's bad form. I guess maybe just learn what you can from the website before going in. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's useful. Yeah, and at least any quick thoughts on that as well? Sure.
I mean, for us, in both this position and the last one, it really starts and ends with the technology. Is there a competitive advantage? So I would, you know, when you're marketing, it's very basic to kind of know what else is out there in that space, to understand really the benefits. If there are negatives, that's okay. But you want to be forthcoming with those things. I mean, us as industry might have the solutions for those negatives. So, you know, you don't want to kind of hide it and then let us figure it out. It actually might fill a gap that we have a solution for those other things that might bring it down or not allow it to stand out by itself. So it really starts and ends with the technology quality, the advantages, the status of the technology. You know, if it's a patent that's been sitting on the shelf for 10 years and nothing has been done with it, it's going to put us off. I mean, it is what it is. As far as behavior, I I mean, I've had good interactions, but just I've noticed that unless it gets on our system, or in this position or the previous position, if we ask some questions and we don't get the answers, it might just fall between the cracks there, because we don't have enough information in order to really look at it seriously. And so that's a place where just the opportunity can fall through just because of lack of follow-up. So, if you don't hear from us, it's not saying that it's rejected necessarily. It's either we didn't get the email, or we're still looking at it, obviously. But if we sent an email asking for additional questions and we didn't get those replies, it's not necessarily that we'll follow up again on that. So just really pay attention to, on your side, kind of following up on those things.
Sure. That's great. No, really interesting.
And again, I know this is odd, but InPart does help in that area, because we get to see those opportunities where they're earlier on, and then even though they're not on our system, InPart has been doing a good job of making sure that the other party kind of answered those. So, yeah.
No, that's great, and thank you for everyone who's sending through their questions on the Q&A. I can see one or two have come to the chat function. If you just pop them in the Q&A, then it makes it easier to go through. I'm going to ask a question now that I guess you guys are expecting to to a greater extent or a lesser extent related to COVID. Now, there's going to be some questions about that in this webinar. So, kind of bringing two questions that we've had from two different people together, I suppose. So, the first question is: in a post-COVID world, what changes do you foresee in the ecosystem for the future of academic industry collaboration? And then, kind of tagged on to that, there's another question about: do you think COVID will lead to an aggressive adoption of virtual innovation by companies? So I thought I'd just sort of tag those two together. Barclay, I don't know if you wanted to start with it.
Sure. I mean, in a post-COVID world, I'm hoping that we are all kind of back to some version of normal, right? But in the current COVID world, so my office is actually on the NC State campus, and we work at having presence at our two other partner schools so that we can have face-to-face interactions with faculty and students. As you can imagine, that's somewhat hindered right now. And so, fortunately, Zoom works, right? But we do prefer the in-person interactions. It just really builds trust. You can just have much easier conversations and actually kind of really get to the kinds of interactions that create a good relationship when you're all there together. So I sincerely hope we can get back to that at some point in the not too distant future. But to answer the second part of that question about virtual innovation, we've proven that Zoom works, and we can accomplish a lot of things virtually without the hotel stays and the airline flights and things like that. So it could actually really accelerate things because we don't have to. We've proven we don't have to travel as much, and that just makes a lot of things easier.
Yeah, Alicia, I don't know if you have any.
Sure. I echo really everything that Barclay said about the in-person definitely having a part going forward when it is possible. I mean, on the technology side, it's interesting because before COVID, Henkel was vamping up the manufacturing, predictive maintenance, digital manufacturing, data-driven things, and COVID has put more of a, putting your foot down on the gas, I guess, on that, because we're now looking more for technologies that can be managed remotely. So there are those new technology searches or search fields that maybe pre-COVID were of interest, but now obviously they're a lot more pressing. Yeah, I mean, the conferences and the in-person definitely are an aspect, but it was, in many cases, it was a starting point, but even before COVID, it wasn't the only way of interacting with industry. So it hasn't necessarily impacted our deal flow significantly. I mean, just the opposite. We have, because you're not traveling, you have more time to participate in pitch sessions and things like that. So, yeah.
That's good. That's good to hear. Yeah, Matthias, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I think almost everything has already been said. For me, it's so what I miss in COVID times. The main thing is the unplannable things and the serendipity. So, you know, the people you run into at a conference in the corridor and something comes out of it. And so those things you can't. Everything that's plannable, that's a task, I think you can achieve quite well. And that's definitely helped there that a lot of people got more literate with the communication technologies, right? Before everybody would avoid them. Now it's of commonplace, and that's good. But as I said, so the soft edge of these things of innovation is that you can't really plan. I think I find harder, and that is definitely missing to a certain degree.
No, I think that's really interesting, and I just from my perspective, I found when you get to the more sort of creative discussions, it can get a little bit draining just doing them all on video, as good as it is for everybody. You know, when you start to dig into something a bit more depth. That's all really interesting. We've got a variety of questions around IP. You'll be unsurprised to hear, I'm sure. So I can see there's one in the channel about what's the IP policy for Eastman for academic partnerships. We got one about what approaches do you take to IP strategy, principally IP capture ownership. Do you employ anything specific when partnering with academic research institutions? So I think that, that question for you specifically for Eastman, I think, and that one kind of translates to everybody really. Is there a particular, and this might be slightly maybe less relevant for you, Alicia, looking from the startup perspective, I assume the startup should have patented their technology if you're going to be interested in investing in them. But yeah. I'm just, Matthias, come to you first on that one, sort of what your approach is. There a standard approach to IP strategy? Do you have a diversified approach depending on what the opportunity is, the stage of development?
Well, I mean, as I said before, I think before we pay for anything, we need to be clear what we actually are paying for, right? If you're paying for something that everybody else afterwards can copy because it's not protected, that's not going to go down really well. So I think it's just a very basic requirement that whatever you have, it is somehow ownable, as I said. So the standard for that is a patent or a number of patents. As I said, there are exceptions where you could think about something lives as a know-how somewhere, trade secret, where you would still access or want a collaboration because you gain so much from what they know about it. So I think that's the only exception. But again, in terms of that wouldn't happen as a licensing, it's more as a consultancy than as type agreement, I suppose. But otherwise, it's a IP is a basic requirement for our job.
Is there any place where it's just become just a barrier? It's been patented too early, or valuations a problem. Just these things that we generally hear. Just hearing about lots of different interactions we have from the preliminary stages. Any times where there are particular barriers that are put up that are insurmountable? I'm not sure from our side. I think that's more sort of like a society aspect, right? If everything is patented and locked down, and nobody can use anything other than paying for it, that's probably a problem generally to solve problems that are that are more answered by a sort of a broader approach. I think in terms of, for us, what we are looking for, I think it's not really a problem. So again, there's sort of a clear definition of what's there and what is protected and what is not, and where is freedom to operate. It just helps us in almost every way. Okay, and Barclay, any thoughts on the IP?
Yeah, so let's see, the actual terms that we have with our partner schools are considered confidential, so I apologize for that, but one can actually go to any number of US academic institutions and find sample research agreements online. We've tried with our partner schools to set up win-win IP situations. And I think actually taking a step back and not speaking about Eastman's experience specifically, but just the IP issue, I've seen examples of just kind of a lack of trust between academic institutions and industry in terms of what each is trying to get out of it. And sometimes that's just driven by maybe a lack of understanding of what's involved in both cases. So from the academic point of view, an individual as a faculty member has spent their life developing an expertise in an area and really wants a lot of a good piece of patent work that comes out of that. From the industry side, they're thinking, well, we're going to have to take on the risk of bringing this to market and possibly installing the capital equipment to manufacture it at scale, et cetera, et cetera. So can we find a balance in who benefits from this IP? So I offer that to hopefully improve the conversation that all of you are having with your various potential partners.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah,
I mean, from my point of view, just to recognize that there are true dilemmas there on decisions of where to patent, and it creeps up on you very early on of the technology and where to invest the money on Asia, on South America. All of those questions they're true dilemmas. And that's where the relationship with industry comes in, and the recommendation to kind of approach us early is we can give our perspective of where those, where we'd like to see patents, I guess, in the future, where it's important. And for us, it's a dilemma also, so.
No, that's really interesting.
Sorry, I would just add one thing to that, which is that we do like to know what terms are going to be kind of upfront. So a situation where let's get the IP and then talk about the terms is less attractive. So getting those licensing terms agreed to before actually embarking on the research is typically important.
No, that's great. Getting up to the last minute or so, so I'm just going to pick out this last question that's come over to us, which I think is an interesting one. Has working with a university or research partner ever inspired you to change your innovation strategy? Is that something that's ever affected any of you? Have you had any U-turns you've had with the universities come up with something?
We are constantly on the lookout for new applications, right? And that's where university can come into play, whereas using our core materials or our core connections and with our customers, and it kind of opens up a window, and that eureka kind of is always nice to have.
Yeah, and
I'd say all the time. I mean, so we are so well connected with academia, as I said, from our sort of existing staff and the past experiences. So you constantly have sort of discussions around things which all the time change your view and change your. It's a continuum in a way, and sort of like a flow back and forth. So yeah, no, this is constantly happening. As I said before, there's so many smart people out there. It would be very silly to just rely on your own judgment, your own knowledge there. So it's. We'll see there's a natural thing of the process, right? It does shape your own opinions, also shapes your own strategy.
The search fields are there to have some sort of starting place, but they're definitely not finite or set in stone. We're always keeping our eyes open.
Yeah, Barclay, any thoughts?
So we look to our external partners to inform and accelerate our strategy. And to the question about does it change, the inform part can definitely change our strategy. We've had research projects where the question amounted to, we're interested in doing this, do you think it'll work or not? And sometimes the answer is no. And that definitely changes the strategy, right? So yeah.
Absolutely. And I guess just anecdotally from our perspective, I think it's very rare that we see a company that comes to our platform that sees something and goes, that is exactly what we need. It is, definable ABC, how could, absolute, fit. It's always that the use case is slightly different than what the technology, the research is, and then understanding the capabilities behind it, what else is going on, how it was built, what they're thinking about in the future is an important part to how it's taken forward. So So that's kind of, yeah, refreshing. So I assume that will be the answer. You know, that it's open-minded and it does change. So good to hear that across the board. Great. Well, we've reached 5 o'clock now. I'm really sorry that we're not going to get through everybody's questions that have sent through. I think we've missed 4 or 5 there, but we could stay on for another hour, probably keeping talking about this. I'd certainly enjoy that. So yeah, I just as a quick wrap up, thank you so much for Barclay, Matthias, Elisa, for joining us today. I really genuinely appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Thanks everyone for joining us, taking the time out to listen to this. So there will be a recording of the webinar. We're going to put it on our blog, so that'll come out in a few days. Everyone who's attended will get an alert to that, and you'll be able to go and share it with different colleagues. Hopefully, if it's interesting for other people to go and listen to as well. We have another webinar coming up, which is all going to be focused on how to engage academic researchers with collaboration, tech transfer. So we're going to have some university-based panelists coming on to talk about how they've been successful in engaging their academics to drive more throughput to tech transfer officers, and that sort of thing. That's going to be early November. So keep your eyes out for that. And other than that, it's just really say, yeah, thanks again for everyone attending, and appreciate everyone's time.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your interest.
Thanks, everyone.
Lots of nice comments coming through about, yeah, great job, very informative. So thanks everyone for your time.
Great.
Thank you.
Good.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Take care.